Emily had always known that her relationship with her mother-in-law, Diane, was complicated, but she never expected to be outright excluded from a family trip. From the very beginning of her marriage to Mark, Diane had made it clear that she didn't think Emily was the right fit for her son. It wasn't about anything specific. Emily had never done anything to offend or disrespect her. She had a stable career, was kind to Mark's relatives, and always made an effort to be part of family gatherings. But Diane was the kind of woman who had a very particular idea of what a perfect daughter-in-law should be, and Emily just didn't fit into that mold. It started with little things, subtle comments about how Emily didn't cook the way Diane did, or how she and Mark were so different in terms of upbringing. Sometimes Diane would conveniently forget to tell Emily about family events, only for Emily to find out through social media or an offhand remark from another relative. Mark, for the most part, tried to stay neutral, unwilling to confront his mother directly, even though he saw how much it hurt his wife. But this time, it was different. The family had been planning a trip for months. A luxurious getaway to a private island resort. It was supposed to be a time for everyone to relax and reconnect, and Emily had been looking forward to it. She and Mark had even discussed what excursions they wanted to do together. Snorkeling, a boat tour, maybe even a spa day. She had rearranged her work schedule, made sure everything at home was in order, and packed her bags early in excitement. Then, just a week before the trip, everything changed. Mark came home looking uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact the way he always did when he had bad news. Emily, sensing something was wrong, asked him what was going on. He hesitated before finally blurting it out. "My mom doesn't think you should come on the trip," he said, his voice uncertain. Emily frowned, her heart sinking. "What do you mean?" Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. She thinks this should be a family-only trip, like just the core family." Emily stared at him, feeling like the air had been sucked out of the room. "I am family, Mark." "I know," he said quickly. "I told her that. But she's being really firm about it. She said it's supposed to be a bonding experience for the family, and she doesn't want anyone who wasn't born into it there." Emily felt anger rising in her chest. "So what? Am I just some outsider now? I've been part of this family for 5 years. Mark shifted uncomfortably. "It's not like that. She doesn't see it that way. She thinks it'll be better if it's just the original family members." Emily folded her arms, her voice turning cold. "And what do you think?" Mark hesitated. "I don't agree with her, but I also don't want to cause a huge fight right before the trip. It's just one trip, Em." Emily couldn't believe what she was hearing. "One trip? Do you even hear yourself? Your mother is banning me from a family vacation, and you're just going along with it?" Mark sighed, looking defeated. "I'm not going along with it. I just don't know how to change her mind. She already talked to my dad and my siblings, and they all agreed to keep the trip small." Emily let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, I see. So they all agreed, and now you just expect me to sit at home while you all go have fun?" Mark looked guilty. "It's not like that, Emily. I hate this too. I wanted you to come, but my mom is being really stubborn about it, and if I push too hard, it's just going to cause more drama." Emily shook her head in disbelief. "So instead of standing up for me, you're choosing the easy way out?" Mark didn't answer, and in that moment, Emily realized something painful. No matter how much she loved her husband, he would never truly stand up to his mother for her. He would always choose keeping the peace over defending her, and that hurt more than anything Diane had done. For the rest of the evening, Emily barely spoke to Mark. She went through the motions of making dinner, watching TV, pretending to be okay. But inside, she was seething. She thought about all the times she had made an effort with his family, all the times she had put up with Diane's passive-aggressive remarks, all the times she had swallowed her pride for the sake of keeping things civil. And for what? To be treated like an outsider when it really mattered? The next day, Mark and his family finalized their travel plans. Emily wasn't even consulted. When she saw the finalized itinerary sitting on their kitchen counter, she felt a mix of anger and sadness wash over her. It was official. She was being left behind. Diane didn't even have the decency to tell her directly. Instead, she sent a group message to the family chat, excitedly talking about their upcoming trip. Emily read the message over and over, her fingers tightening around her phone. There was no mention of her. It was as if she had never been part of the plan at all. She could feel the sting of humiliation creeping in. Did Diane do this to hurt her on purpose, or did she truly not care about her feelings at all? Either way, the message was clear. Emily was not welcome. That night, when Mark tried to comfort her, she pulled away. "I just need some space," she said quietly. Mark sighed. "Emily, I don't want this to come between us." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "It already has." For the next few days, Emily withdrew. She didn't argue with Mark about the trip anymore. She didn't even mention it. If he wanted to go without her, fine. She wasn't going to beg to be included in a family that clearly didn't see her as one of their own. But deep down, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to sit around feeling sorry for herself. If Diane thought she could just push Emily aside, she was wrong. She would find a way to turn this situation around. She just didn't know how yet. The morning after Mark left for the family trip, Emily woke up feeling an odd mix of emotions. Part of her still felt the sting of rejection. Being excluded from something that should have included her was humiliating. But another part of her felt something else, something unfamiliar but exhilarating. Freedom. For the first time in a long while, she didn't have to tiptoe around Diane's disapproving glances or pretend not to notice the way she was treated as an outsider. She was on her own. And maybe, just maybe, that wasn't such a bad thing. Instead of sulking at home, Emily decided to take control of her own happiness. She called her best friend, Lisa, and suggested they meet for coffee. Lisa had always been her sounding board, the one person who truly understood how difficult it was to be married into a family that didn't fully accept her. When Emily arrived at their favorite cafe, Lisa was already waiting for her at a corner table, 2 lattes in front of her. She greeted Emily with a sympathetic smile. "Okay," Lisa said as Emily sat down. "Tell me everything." Emily let out a deep sigh and launched into the whole story. The family trip, Diane's insistence that she wasn't really family, and Mark's complete failure to stand up for her. Lisa listened, her expression shifting between disbelief and anger. "Wow," she said when Emily finally finished. "That is next-level cruel. I mean, I always knew Diane didn't like you, but to actually ban you from a family trip? That's insane." Emily stirred her latte absent-mindedly. "I just don't understand how Mark could let this happen. I thought he had my back." Lisa sighed. "You know how he is with his mom. He never wants to rock the boat. But honestly, Em, I think this is a blessing in disguise." Emily raised an eyebrow. "A blessing? How?" "Because now you get to do whatever the hell you want, instead of wasting a week trying to impress a woman who will never be happy, no matter what you do." Emily considered that. Lisa had a point. She had spent years bending over backward trying to be accepted, and what had it gotten her? A canceled plane ticket and a bruised ego. Maybe it was time to stop trying so hard. Lisa took a sip of her coffee, then leaned forward, eyes sparkling with excitement. "Actually, this might be perfect timing. I've been meaning to talk to you about something." Emily tilted her head. "What is it?" Lisa pulled out her phone and swiped through some emails before handing it to Emily. "My firm just started working with this exclusive real estate group that's selling shares in private islands. It's a huge investment opportunity. Big tourism potential, luxury development, all that. You've always said you wanted to do something different with the inheritance from your aunt. Maybe this is it?" Emily's eyes widened as she scrolled through the details. The investment was structured in a way that allowed buyers to own a stake in an island, either for personal use or as part of a tourism venture. The islands were all in high-end, exclusive locations, and the buy-in wasn't as outrageous as she would have expected. "I don't know," she said hesitantly. "I've never invested in anything like this before." Lisa grinned. "You don't have to decide today. But think about it. You've always wanted more independence, right? What if, instead of spending your time trying to fit into someone else's family, you focused on building something for yourself?" Emily had never thought about it like that before. For years, she had poured so much energy into trying to be accepted that she had put her own ambitions on the back burner. Maybe it was time to change that. "Let me see more details," she said, feeling a small spark of excitement. Lisa spent the next hour going over the information with her, explaining the process and showing her pictures of the islands available for investment. Each one was stunning. Pristine beaches, crystal clear waters, private resorts in the making. But then, something caught Emily's eye. One of the islands looked familiar. "Wait," she said, zooming in on the name of the island. Her stomach flipped. This is the island Mark's family went to." Lisa's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" Emily nodded slowly, staring at the screen. It was too much of a coincidence. Out of all the places Diane could have chosen for the trip, it just happened to be an island that was partially up for sale? Lisa smirked. "Oh, this is too good. Imagine her face if she found out you owned part of the island she banned you from." Emily let out a breathless laugh. The idea was almost too ridiculous to believe. But as she sat there, staring at the listing, something inside her clicked. Maybe this wasn't just a coincidence. Maybe this was an opportunity. She looked at Lisa, a slow smile spreading across her face. "All right. Tell me exactly what I need to do to buy in." Over the next few days, Emily threw herself into the process. She met with Lisa's investment contacts, reviewed contracts, and did her own research on the property. It turned out that the island was being developed into a high-end resort destination, and a portion of it was available for private ownership. By buying in, Emily would have access to certain exclusive areas of the island, areas that regular tourists wouldn't be allowed into. It was a big step, but for the first time in a long while, Emily felt like she was doing something purely for herself. She wasn't just reacting to what Diane had done. She was taking control of her own future. A week after Mark had left for the trip, Emily received an official email confirming her investment. She was now a partial owner of the very island her in-laws were vacationing on. She couldn't help but laugh at the irony. Emily hadn't told Mark anything yet. He had called her a few times from the island, checking in and acting like nothing was wrong. She kept the conversations short, not wanting to get into another argument. But she knew it was only a matter of time before Diane found out. And when she did, Emily would be ready. The moment Emily received the official confirmation of her investment, a strange sense of satisfaction settled over her. It wasn't revenge. Not exactly. She hadn't bought into the island just to get back at Diane, though she would be lying if she said the irony wasn't delicious. No, this was about something bigger. It was about reclaiming her sense of self, about doing something for herself, instead of constantly bending over backward for a family that didn't appreciate her. For the first time in years, she felt like she was in control. She didn't tell Mark right away. He had been calling her periodically from the island, acting as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't just had one of the most painful conversations of their marriage before he left. Emily kept the calls short, giving him non-committal answers when he asked how she was doing. She wasn't ready to tell him yet. She wanted to wait. And then, the moment she had unknowingly been waiting for arrived. It was a quiet afternoon when her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and saw Mark's name flashing. With a deep breath, she answered. "Hey," he said. His voice was light, but there was something off about it, something tense. "Hey," she replied, keeping her tone neutral. "So, Weird thing happened today, Mark continued slowly. We were trying to book this private area of the island for a family dinner, and the resort staff told us it was restricted. Emily suppressed a smile. Oh? Yeah, he said. Apparently it's owned by a private investor and they don't allow general guests in that section. My mom tried to argue with them, but they wouldn't budge. Emmeline leaned back in her chair, waiting. And, Mark continued, his voice now tinged with suspicion, when she demanded to know who the investor was, they showed her the ownership records. There was a pause. Emily imagined the exact moment Diane must have seen her name listed on the documents. The way her face must have twisted with confusion, then horror. She wished she could have been there to witness it. Finally, Mark spoke again. Emily, your name was on the records. She could practically hear the gears turning in his head, trying to make sense of it. Yeah, she said casually. That makes sense? Another pause. Wait, what do you mean that makes sense? Emily took a sip of her tea, drawing out the moment. I mean, I bought into the island. I own part of it now. Silence. Then, finally, Mark let out a baffled laugh. You're kidding. I'm not, she said, a small smile playing on her lips. You... Emily, what? When? How? His voice was a mixture of shock and something else. Something close to admiration, though he probably didn't realize it yet. A few days ago, Lisa's firm was handling the investment sales. She told me about it, and it seemed like a good opportunity, so I went for it. Mark exhaled sharply. Okay, but... Emily, you own part of the island? The same island we're vacationing on? Yep, she said. Funny how that worked out, huh? She could hear Mark running a hand through his hair, trying to process everything. I don't even know what to say. My mom was livid when she saw your name. Emily chuckled. I imagine she was. You should have seen her. She started arguing with the staff, insisting there had to be a mistake. When they confirmed it, she went silent for a full 30 seconds. I think it was the first time in her life she didn't know what to say. The mental image was too good. Emily wished she had been there to see it in person. So what now? Mark asked after a moment. Emily shrugged, even though he couldn't see her. Nothing, really. I mean, I'm not going to fly over there and crash your vacation if that's what you're worried about. I just thought it was a good investment. Mark hesitated. Emily, be honest. Did you do this just to get back at my mom? Emily considered that. No, she said truthfully. I didn't buy it just for her. But I won't lie. It is kind of poetic justice, isn't it? Mark let out another stunned laugh. Yeah, it really is. There was a beat of silence between them, a shift in the conversation. When Mark spoke again, his voice was softer. Look, I know things have been rough between us lately, and I know I let you down. Emily didn't say anything. But I think I'm starting to see what you've been saying all along, about my mom, about how she treats you, about how I should have handled this differently. Emily felt a small flicker of hope, but she wasn't ready to let him off the hook so easily. It took this for you to realize that? Mark sighed. I guess I just didn't want to see it before. I kept thinking if I kept the peace, things would eventually get better. But they haven't. And now, I don't know. Maybe I should have done more. Emily softened slightly. Yeah, you should have. Another pause. Then Mark chuckled again, still in disbelief. My mom still hasn't recovered. She keeps pacing around like she's trying to figure out how the universe allowed this to happen. Emily smirked. Tell her it's karma. Mark laughed. I just might. Then his tone turned more serious. Emily, do you think we can talk about everything when I get back? Really talk? She hesitated for a moment, then nodded, even though he couldn't see her. Yeah, I think we should. For the first time in a long time, Emily felt like they were finally on the same page. When Mark returned from the trip a few days later, Emily wasn't sure what to expect. Their last conversation had felt like progress, but years of disappointment had taught her not to get her hopes up too quickly. Still, when she saw him step through the front door, looking exhausted but somehow lighter, she felt something inside her shift. He dropped his bags by the entrance and let out a long breath. "Hey." "Hey," she said back, watching him carefully. For a moment they just stood there, as if trying to gauge where they stood after everything that had happened. Then, Mark ran a hand through his hair and let out a dry laugh. "You have no idea how much chaos you caused on that island." Emily smirked. "Oh, I think I have some idea." Mark shook his head, walking over to the couch and collapsing onto it. "My mom was livid the entire trip. She kept trying to find loopholes, ways to argue with the resort staff about access to the private areas. At one point she even suggested calling the island management directly to complain." He looked up at Emily. "You know what they told her?" Emily raised an eyebrow. "What?" "That if she wanted to discuss anything regarding property restrictions, she'd have to take it up with the owner." "You." Emily let out a small laugh. "And did she?" Mark groaned. "Oh, she wanted to. She spent an entire evening ranting about how this must have been some kind of setup, like you orchestrated the whole thing just to humiliate her." Emily crossed her arms. "Funny how she automatically assumes it's about her." "I made that investment because it was a good opportunity." Mark nodded. "I told her that. But you know my mom. If something doesn't go her way, she takes it as a personal attack." He let out a sigh. "By the last couple of days, she started realizing she couldn't do anything about it. That's when the sulking started. She barely spoke during the final dinner." Emily couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. For years, she had been on the receiving end of Diane's dismissiveness, her constant little power plays. This time, the tables had turned, not because Emily had sought revenge, but because she had simply chosen herself for once. She sat down across from Mark, watching him carefully. "And you? What did you think about all of this?" Mark was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Honestly, at first I was just shocked. It felt surreal, knowing you were part owner of the place we were vacationing at. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something." He looked up at her. "You didn't do anything wrong. You made an investment. A smart one, actually. And the fact that it just happened to be the same place my mom chose? That's not your fault. If anything, it's kind of poetic." Emily studied his face, trying to decide if he really meant it. "So you don't think I did this out of spite?" Mark shook his head. "I think my mom wants to believe that, because it makes her feel like the victim. But no. I see it differently now. You've been dealing with her passive-aggressive nonsense for years, and I never really did anything to stop it." He sighed. "I should have. I should have stood up for you more. But I kept thinking if I just stayed neutral, things would work themselves out." Emily's chest tightened. She had waited so long to hear something like this from him. And now? Mark met her gaze. "Now I realize that by staying neutral, I wasn't protecting you. I was just making it easier for my mom to keep treating you like an outsider. And that's not okay." He let out a humorless laugh. "Lisa told me something when I ran into her at the airport. She said, if you keep waiting for your mom to change, you're going to lose the best thing in your life." He exhaled. "And I think she's right." Emily felt something in her throat tighten. She hadn't expected Lisa to say something like that to him. But she was grateful. For the first time in a long while, she saw something different in Mark's expression. Regret. Understanding. A willingness to actually do something about the problem instead of just avoiding it. "So," she said carefully, "what does that mean going forward?" Mark took a deep breath. "It means that from now on, I'm not just going to sit back and let my mom push you around. It means that the next time she pulls something like this, I'm not just going to stay out of it. I'm going to stand up for you." He reached for her hand. "And it means that I finally get why you were so hurt. I should have seen it sooner, Emily. I'm sorry." Emily stared at him, her emotions warring inside her. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But after years of disappointments, part of her was afraid to let her guard down. "Words are easy, Mark," she said softly. "I need to see actions." Mark nodded. "I know, and I'll prove it to you." They sat in silence for a moment, his fingers laced through hers. Emily could feel the shift between them. Something real, something hopeful. After a while, Mark let out another small laugh. "You know, my mom still doesn't know what to do with this situation. She was so convinced she had the upper hand, and now she's the one who got blindsided." Emily smirked. "Guess she'll have to get used to it." Mark grinned. "Yeah, I think she will." For the first time in years, Emily didn't feel like she was fighting to belong in her own marriage. She didn't feel like she had to prove herself to Diane or constantly defend her place in the family. She had finally drawn a line. And this time, Mark was on her side of it. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about winning. It was about knowing her own worth. And for the first time, she felt truly free.